Welcome back, friends. My name is Brian and I am back in the garage again today. Today I've got a great quick tip for you, how to change the oil in your Honda overhead valve motor. So this motor, as you probably know, has been used in so many bikes, it's just unbelievable. The ubiquitous Super Cub, there's millions of those out there. The Honda ATCs, those three-wheelers, lots of those out there. Honda CRF 50 and 70, which I built last year, and bikes like this Honda CT70 that I also just recently built. So this motor is everywhere. Now your particular application may have some small variations, but in general, these motors are all basically the same. So just pay attention to the little details. Generally the procedure is basically the same. So super easy job in general. There are a couple little tricks which I'm going to show you, but not much more to say other than that. So let's just pick up some tools and go to work. In the interest of making things a little clearer later on, let's first go over inspecting the oil level. Loosen and remove the oil filler cap on the right side of the motor next to the kickstart. Wipe the dipstick clean and reinsert it without screwing it in. Level the bike. Then recheck the oil level on the dipstick. This level is right at the minimum. This is the low level indicator and the high level. An acceptable oil level can fall anywhere between this range. Reinsert the dipstick and tighten it, making sure that this O-ring is still in place. Now this part is tricky. Under the motor there are two bolts. This is the oil drain and this is for accessing the timing chain tensioner. Make sure to remove the oil drain, which is the larger bolt located on the right side of the motor below the clutch cover. Remove the drain bolt and allow the oil to completely drain. The service manual recommends warming the motor first, and I don't do this because I don't like working on hot motors, but the oil will drain faster if it's warm. The motor has a crankcase vent, so if you just wait, the wonder of gravity will ensure that all of the oil will drain out. Clean and reinstall the drain bolt and then tighten it to 25 Newton meters. I have a lot of bikes in my shop, so I like to make some kind of reminder anytime I remove oil or water from one of my bikes. All right, so the oil's out. When we get back, I want to discuss with you some oil considerations based on where you live and your riding conditions. So be right back. All right, so let's go over Honda's oil recommendations. The ambient temperature range of Honda's recommended oils is between 5 degrees and 100 degrees Fahrenheit and even beyond. Traditionally, Honda has recommended 10W30. This oil has a recommended ambient temperature range from about 5 degrees Fahrenheit to about 90 degrees. The 20W oils, 50 and 40, are recommended for super hot climates, and I'm using 10W40 because where I live in Texas, it's hot as hell, and we routinely have riding days that are well over 100 degrees. Once you've settled on the type of oil that you're going to use, the next little trick is determining which volumetric unit that you're going to use to decide how much oil you're going to put into the crankcase. Now, if you look at the Honda literature, they express the units of volume in pints, quarts, and liters. And then, of course, if you look at the oil bottle, it expresses them in ounces, quarts, and milliliters. And then if you look at the side strip, it's even more confusing, as expressed in pints, ounces, and milliliters. And just to make it a little bit more complicated, the units of volume, the way that they read on the side of this thing, they go from 100 all the way up to 800 and beyond. It would be a lot easier if this was in reverse, because then you could pour out a certain amount of oil and you would know exactly how much oil you're supposed to have left in the bottle, which would make things a lot simpler. But of course that would be too easy and too simple. You have to make it as hard as possible. And just to make it a little bit more confusing, the clutch cover expresses the volume in liters only, 8/10. So metric units, whether it's liters or milliliters, is the only unit of measure that is consistent in the two manuals and the clutch cover. So if you're okay with using metric units, the next thing you got to figure out is the actual fill volume. And as you might expect, it depends on where you look as to the recommended fill volume. In the CRF service manual, a distinction is made based on draining, meaning the oil change, specifying a volume of 6/10 of a liter, and disassembly where 8/10 is recommended. In the CT manual, there's no distinction made for draining versus disassembly. It just reads 7/10 of a liter. And then of course, if you remember, the crankcase read 0.8 of a liter. So it's by no means clear how much fill volume you're supposed to use. So I am going to share with you the way that I do it. It's not the only way that you can do it, but to me, it's the simplest way. And to me, it's using a system I call common sense. So in this case, what you're going to do is look for the minimum fill volume, which was listed in the CRF manual, and that was 0.6 of a liter. So we're going to start by measuring out and filling the crankcase with 0.6 of a liter of oil. Using my common sense method, find some sort of clean container and pour out all but 0.6 of a liter, which is 600 milliliters on this bottle. Pour 0.6 of a liter into the crankcase, and by the way, the bottle is designed to be used for pouring provided you orient the filling spout toward the top like this, but you can always use a funnel if you prefer. Level the bike and check the oil using the dipstick, and then add a little bit more if needed, until the dipstick shows the level falling between the minimum and the maximum recommended. This may take a little bit of trial and error, but it'll keep you from overfilling the crankcase, which is the main thing you want to avoid. Rely less on the manual and more on the dipstick indicator. Once you're done, just tighten up the fill cap snugly by hand and you're done. All right, so a couple little pitfalls, a couple little tricks, but not a super difficult job. But now that you've changed your oil, you may be thinking like, how often am I supposed to change my oil? And like this whole process, it depends on where you look. The CRF manual recommends changing the oil after the first 100 miles and then every 600 miles thereafter. The CT manual makes no recommendations after the initial break-in, and then it recommends changing the oil at 600 miles, then finally every 12 months or 1,250 miles, whichever occurs first. My recommendation relies again on common sense. So I change my oil very, very frequently, and there's a lot of good reasons why. One, if your bike is in the garage, it develops condensation in the crankcase. That's going to get in your oil, and it's going to mix in your oil. So even if you don't have a lot of miles on your bike, you may just want to change your oil with some frequency anyway. Another thing too, it's a very simple job, and because of that, it's something that to me, it doesn't hurt to just do it more frequently. On my CT70, I don't think I had more than 25 miles on that bike before I changed the oil. So if that gives you any idea about how I feel about changing the oil, you can take some advice from me or not, it's up to you. But I think changing it is really fun, quite frankly, and it's a great way to have fun in your garage.